you probably know this already, and that's probably why you joined, but we are very excited today to be talking about a report that Aquent just put out that is all about teamwork and trust. So, and what we have done is we have actually gathered research from 5,431 people, exactly that. That's a 5,000 from North America, from the UK, from Europe, from Asia Pacific. So this is a global survey that we have conducted. We have almost an exactly even split between leaders and non-leaders who have responded. So it's a really good balanced feedback on what we found, which were 8 behaviors of high performing teams. Those are all outlined in the report. If you don't have a copy of it already, you're definitely going to want one after today. And there's a link right there to download the Talent Insight report. We also share 6 key actions that leaders can take and that you can take in your workplace to achieve that high performing team status. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, obviously, we're not going to be able to go through the entire report today, and that is not our intent, but we're super excited to have 2 experts here that are going to talk about trust as a key to high performing teams. And one of those is, well, actually, I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they like that. And we are going to start with Margot. Margot, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Margot Bloomstein. I am, as I said earlier, based outside of Boston, and I'm a brand and content strategy consultant. I've been working in the industry for a little over 20 years. And one of my big interests around content and content strategy and how organizations engage with their external and internal audiences around content is how we use content to foster trust. I think that is one of the big hot button issues that maybe we don't always want to acknowledge when we're saying like, oh, technology is a problem, our design system is a problem. We're having all these issues with our CMS and AI and other TLAs. And we embrace all of this technology without necessarily seeing how can it help us fix the very non-technological problems, the very cultural problems that affect our organizations and affect organizational success and productivity, as well as individual satisfaction and happiness that maybe translates into loyalty or just or productivity or efficiency or just general enjoyment of what we do, who we are, how we are. And I think trust factors into that a lot. And I think that organizations can do a lot about it. I think individual contributors can, team managers, design leaders can. So that's what I'm excited to get into today.
I love your passion for this, Margot. And so since you're probably not going to bring it up all by yourself, Margot actually wrote a book. Like she literally wrote the book on trust, That's what I call it. And I'm very excited to show something cool about my book. So if you don't have Trustworthy by Margot already, look at this. Come on. How clever is that? And it is absolutely worth a read. Margot has lots of great real world examples of how content and trust go hand in hand or don't. So anyway, check that out. Thank you, Margot. All right, ST, are you ready? It's introduction time.
I'm ready. Margot wrote the book on trust. I read the book on trust. Highly recommend. Before I get into my bio, highly recommend it. I'm Sarah Tyler Moore, ST to all of you. I'm Industry Director of Technology here at Aquent, where I manage a team of technology salespeople. Some of them are on today. Hello, shout out team. And we work with small business tech companies all the way up to really large Fortune 100 companies. I'm also an avid reader, if you couldn't tell. I like hiking. I'm a working mom, and I'm now a Girl Scout troop leader. So wearing a lot of hats.
You're a brave soul, ST. I love that. Thank you so much. Yes, and good. That's definitely a great shout out for Margot's book when you have that many books behind you arranged in rainbow order. So how do you go wrong with that? So anyway, thank you so much for that. I'm Susie Hall, I'm President of Customer Engagement and Community here at Aquent. I've been here for 24 years, and I have actually lead a community called Inside Out for senior design leaders at high profile brands of in-house teams. So obviously the concept of trust and team performance comes up a lot for us as well. So I'm super excited to dig into this today. So let's head towards the report and talk a little bit about that. I am curious, Margot, what surprised you most from the results of this report that we just put out?
Well, I think in looking through it, the report does a really good job of clarifying what makes a high-performing team. Why would you want to be on a high-performing team? What are some of the characteristics of it? And then after we define it and people say, I am in a high-performing team as I'm answering these questions or not, the thing that really kind of like rang bells for me is like, oh, whoo, we got an opportunity here. Not just a challenge, but maybe an opportunity as well, is that we saw that only 77% of high-performing teams embrace constructive feedback, that they nurture constructive feedback and maybe reward for it among team members. And I was floored that that number was not higher. I think looking across kind of like my own career when I was working in-house in agencies or in corporations, the places where I felt like I was growing the most and improving the most were cultures where I remember after meetings, people coming up and saying, I like how you did that. Next time, I think you should do this differently. Or I was able to understand this report really well. However, we need to start defining this better or using this kind of information design to clarify that topic, where there was that kind of culture of open feedback. And the fact that only 77% of high-performing teams nurture that kind of feedback, to me, that's a proof point that there is room for improvement in all kinds of teams. That if you're like, we're not there yet, maybe you say, oh, okay, we're in good company. A lot of teams are not in that place yet of nurturing constructive feedback. What can we do if that's kind of the prize, if that's where we want to be? What can we start doing to model it, to reward for it, to demonstrate or teach people good ways of giving feedback?
Yeah.
There are a lot of good resources on that. So I think that was the big thing that stood out to me.
That is really shocking because 77% sounds really high. And when you look at the counterpoint to that, 46% of low to moderately performing teams reported that they embrace constructive feedback. So that's also a low number. But with that number, you would certainly think that high performing teams would be well above 77%. So I love that insight, Margot. Yes, thank you. And huge opportunity. I can't imagine the concept of a team that performs well and doesn't give feedback. Like, how do you even grow? So thank you so much. Go ahead.
I feel like that's not, that's worth considering too, because if you're on a team or maybe you lead a team and you're like, we are productive, we are efficient, we're making our numbers, things are good. But if you look around and you're like, people are afraid to tell each other what they really think, or they think if they give feedback to the boss or to somebody that's been working on something for a long time, that they're going to get smacked down. I think there's an opportunity both to say, wow, we could be even better if we did stoke that culture of feedback.
Yeah.
And also if we modeled that kind of vulnerability, maybe it would give people healthier outlets to grow or to blow off steam or to improve their work. Because right now, if they're not able to share in that way, something else must be happening. Either they're working really hard, not getting good feedback, and burning out and leaving. Maybe you've got a retention problem, which is not great for anybody. Or maybe it's the case where in the office, people don't have a good culture of feedback. But sure enough, after they leave or in the back channel on Slack, that's when they're hashing it out or trashing each other or engaging in other less productive behaviors. So either way, I think there's a real opportunity to grow there.
I love that insight. I totally agree with that. So ST, on to you. What surprised you most about the results of our study?
Yeah, it goes back to return to office or remote for me. And I like, Margot, how you framed that in terms of your experience. So I think I'm a little biased in that I was remote kind of pre-2020 in some capacity, probably 30%. Aquin as a company, we've proven that remote works, and it has for years. So just seeing that, 45% of respondents are remote, yet 66% of those remote teams identify as high performing versus 47% of on-site teams. I'm truly just kind of surprised that we are still trying to justify the ROI of remote work. It seems so obvious to me. I'm a working mom myself. I can walk down and get my kid off the bus. So I'm spending more time when I work from home on actual work. And just the implications for diversity, the implications for trust, and Margot's point about
Yeah.
feeling comfortable at work to share, right, and to engage. Remote work just seems to lend itself so well for all of those goals that a lot of companies are saying that they want to hit and they want to get to. But then on the other hand, they're kind of dialing back the remote and going RTO all the way.
Yes. And we'll dig into that a little bit later as well. But I would imagine this concept of remote, you would think when people are remote, it is more challenging to give feedback, to create safe spaces when they are not able to, you don't have the ease of seeing someone in person in the office. And yet, high performing teams, though still just 77% of them, still are embracing constructive feedback. So they must be finding a way to do that. So we'll talk about remote and return to office a little bit. I just want to remind, and I know there was a little banner that popped up here earlier. If you have any questions, you can throw them into the chat. We do have a couple of comments already in light of what you said, Margot. Deborah said, safe space, radical candor, a great way to give feedback. And then also Taylor added, start with the positives when giving feedback, dive into possible improvements. So it's a great way to ease in if you're not comfortable giving candid feedback to get yourself there. So thank you for interacting here in the comments. We love that. So before we jump into our next question, Jody has a question here. Is it that companies don't want to embrace remote work? Is it that the companies that don't want to embrace remote work don't trust their employees? What do you think about that?
I love that question, Jody. Shout out to you, Jody. I think it's a couple things. So I think it has to do, yes, with trust, but it also feels like comfort zone, right? I think that a lot of leaders are more comfortable when they can see the work being done in the same office. They can walk by someone's desk and have that conversation. They don't have to be as intentional. They don't have to put as much thought into it. When you're working from home or working remotely, you have to think about what you're saying and be intentional about the time you're saying it, the medium you're saying it on. So in some ways, it might seem easier just to return to the office. And I think too, and I say this delicately, that there might be a generational component too. We know that younger generations prefer remote work for the most part. And oftentimes folks that are in management might be from an older generation, not always true. But maybe that's just what they're used to and that's what they've become accustomed to. And it's hard to get out of your comfort zone if you don't have to.
I think some of it also goes to measurement, because if historically organizations have had very quantitative ways of measuring productivity that are just about butts in seats, time in the office. Did you work an 8-hour day? It almost becomes a correlation versus causation problem. Who cares how many hours someone worked if they met and exceeded their goals? And they also reported having overall high job satisfaction. If they did well by themselves, well by their team, well by their company, and added to the bottom line, and they did it in less time, we should reward that, because we call that efficiency. Why would you not want people to be more efficient? But if people have always measured value by time in the office, we need to rethink those things. And I think some of the ways that team members can help with that is by having open conversations with managers to say, how do you manage, or how do you assess my productivity? How does the company reward my productivity or recognize it? And if it is not about, and if we're able to clarify that time spent in the office directly correlates with the bottom line, okay, let's openly acknowledge that then and say, let's measure our success in other ways. And it turns out that doesn't need to be tied to the time you're spending in a specific place. And I think if we're able to have those open conversations, maybe broach or proactively engage in those open conversations through an organization. If team managers are able to then report up and say, here's how I'm measuring my team's value, that is kind of vulnerability, open communication, and then consistent reporting on those metrics, that helps breed trust. If we tell people, trust me for doing these things, that's going to go a long way.
I love that. And I love your approach too of asking questions, because I think often people are just frustrated with their situation. They're like, this doesn't make sense to me. And there's obviously a lot in the news of opinions on that, but being able to ask questions, whether you're an individual contributor asking that of your manager, whether you're a manager asking that of the executive or senior leaders, whatever that may be, opening the door to ask that question is fantastic. And speaking of metrics, we have a question from Tyler. Thank you. Here's what it is. What was the metric you used to define high performance? So for the purpose of this report, what we did was we had respondents self-identify whether they felt they were part of a high-performing team or were not part of a high-performing team. And then based on those two categories, we gathered a lot more insights about their situation and what their thoughts were around the team itself. So that's what you'll see in terms of insights, but it was self-reported high-performing. So thank you for that question, Tyler. We have another couple of other comments here too. Carl says, we're really talking about culture building. What behavior is rewarded and how? So Margot, that's perfect. That definitely echoes what you're saying. And Chris said, some feel like they don't have control unless everyone is in the office. They don't care about the data. They don't mind countless hours lost from needless interruptions. Mic drop. I don't know.
I think that's a total mic drop, Chris. I think that control component has got to be part of the conversation, right? But I would say if you're a manager who cares about controlling your team, then you're not a leader. Leaders don't care about control. Leaders care about outcomes. They care about culture, and they care about people feeling like they can be productive at work. And they also care about bringing diverse perspectives into a team. So control versus giving others autonomy are just two different worlds.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And I think being able to identify that delta between control and outcomes is such an important way for individual contributors to frame those conversations with their managers, for managers to frame the conversation with their team too, because if we can give people the freedom to do what they need to do what they what will give them the most satisfaction at work, as well as contribute to the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
That's the win situation. Because some employers, some managers, some team leaders, and I'll put it in quotes because I raise an eyebrow to that, they don't care unless they can see people in their seats doing the work. But what they do care about is the bottom line. And I think once they're seeing problems with retention, people saying, I own my time and my talent and skills, and I want to take them elsewhere to a culture that is a better fit, that changes the conversation. It's more expensive to recruit and hire someone and train them than to just retain them. And when we have to deal with issues of turnover, when we have to deal with issues of not meeting financial goals for every quarter, that starts showing up not as a kind of feel-good qualitative thing, but as something that's an equally valid data point.
I completely agree with you. And whoa, Margot, I was transitioning us to the role of trust conversation, and we got a hot question right here in the comments that can lead us there. So Stuart asks, is trust earned or given?
It is a two-way street. Oh. Well, but maybe not in the way that you think. I think that brands, leaders, organizations, managers do need to earn the trust of the people that they're hoping to steer toward their product, if it's a brand,
Mm-hmm.
or toward within the organization, if it's a team. And I think the way you do that is by giving more trust to your audience. So I think if you're a brand, the way that you kind of cultivate and nurture trust from your audience is by empowering them with more information to make better decisions. Maybe you start revealing more of a product roadmap. Maybe you help them self-educate by giving them more information about the product space so they can make more informed decisions. I think if you're a team manager, the way you build trust in your team is by empowering them to have more open conversations, by building that culture of feedback that we were talking about, and rewarding for that. That if somebody comes in and says, I don't know how to do this, I need additional training, or I'm not sure who to ask to get more guidance on this particular project, you don't smack them down for it, but you help them make those connections in the organization. And maybe also publicly recognize the power of saying, I don't know, I need more information. How do I get that? I think by building that kind of culture that encourages open communication, encourages people to share what they're doing, and also share both what they know, what they've learned, as well as what they don't know, what they're still trying to learn. I think that's how you start building more of a culture of trust grounded in a powerful kind of vulnerability.
I love that you mentioned vulnerability too. So just going back to this, is trust earned or given? I think, again, it's sides of the same coin. I think that it also depends on the role that you play within your team or your organization. If, for me personally, as a manager, I give trust because it says more about me and how I show up and the team than it does the folks that are on the team. I don't care if that person's going to break trust. That's on them. What's on me is what I give to someone else and my integrity, right? And I love what you said about vulnerability, Margot, because thinking out your book. And one of the most perplexing things that I've realized on my management journey is the times where you're vulnerable, the times where you make mistakes and you own those mistakes openly with your team, that actually creates way more strong communication, trust. It's crazy to me to think that, wow, like me messing up actually made me seem human. It made other people be able to relate to me, and it made it okay for them to make mistakes too. And I think that's maybe the through line between Margot's book, Trustworthy, and then the report as well, is be vulnerable enough to say, I made a mistake. Because if you feel that way, your team will feel that way too. And then that is going to produce a better outcome for everyone.
Totally.
I think those opportunities, and what I was seeing in my research is that those opportunities and examples span industries, levels within organizations, and also outside of organizations. Like when we think about like in families, in communities, because I do believe that there's that sense that what can work in kind of the macro level, we can figure it out first in the micro level. But think of how powerful it is to be able to say, you know, I used to think this, but then I was wrong. I learned these other things, and now I believe this. To be able to model that. One of the examples that I shared in Trustworthy is around public health and how people encourage vaccination, how doctors encourage vaccination. One of the most powerful ways to move the needle, no pun intended, on that is when already trusted medical professionals, i.e. someone's own holistic healthcare practitioner or personal physician, has been able to say, I was uncertain about this too. Maybe it's a new therapy, a new class of drugs or vaccination or something, and says, but here's what I learned. This is the process that I went through for researching it. Now I believe this. That has been proven again and again across multiple studies to actually improve public health then writ large. That's a powerful thing. And I've seen it in lots of corporate settings too, when maybe the CEO messes up, or maybe somebody really big in the organization does a reply all and looks really stupid. To then be able to say, I'm sorry, I didn't do that right. I didn't handle it right. Here's what I'm going to do now to improve moving forward. That models how to do a public apology, how to improve, and it helps everyone in that way.
I love it. There's so many ways to show and earn. I love that with this kicked off with is trust earned or given. So, and I think we've got a lot of examples of that here. Just a little time check here. Thank you everyone for sticking it out with us. You're going to want to stick it out a little bit longer because we actually have a surprise at the end of our call today. We're going to do a book giveaway. So more details to come. So stick it out with us. And we have several questions coming here in the chat. So I'm going to jump in. Stephen Brooks wrote, how much ROI do you feel organizations factor annual real estate cost into encouraging employees to come into the office, even if it's just a few days a week? That's such a great question. What kind of ROI do you think that leaders, I love that return to office is a hot button. It just is. And it is all about trust. So there you go. So what do you think? ROI. How much do you think they expect when they say you got to come back in the office?
I think it varies across company, but in many cases, when we just take it as a given, when an organization assumes, oh, productivity will improve when people are here, it's and I said this before, I think it's a false premise that confuses correlation and causation. It makes just as much sense in many corporate cultures as saying, oh, well, if we order lunch on Tuesdays, things will improve in productivity. Or if everyone starts wearing purple, things will improve. Like, how do we know that? Just because it's how it's always been? Like, if you were always a purple wearing organization. Because in many cases, the things that improve productivity aren't about presence. They're not about co-location. They're instead about better communication. And that can happen in many different ways. In some corporate cultures, in some industries, you do need to be in the same place to communicate effectively, maybe to engage in sort of happenstance, occasional hallway conversations that don't happen unless you're passing in the same physical hallway. But then in other environments, you see how people that return to the office, well, being back in the office maybe 1 or 2 days a week, that's not an opportunity to have meetings together. It's an opportunity to be able to socially reconnect and maybe gather for, like, I know of one corporation where a lot of people are playing a lot of cribbage over lunchtime. And it's good. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing for them to all be in the same place and have that kind of opportunity to reconnect. But in other cases, people are heading back into offices and all hopping on Zoom because teams are still geographically distributed anyhow in lots of different offices, or they're getting really good at communicating over Slack, having like the conversations that they need to have there, and being in the office doesn't really matter for that. Let them communicate where they are. And in fact, when they were asking people to return to the office, it may be breaking some of the communication norms that we've established over the past few years.
Yes, totally agree with that. And I do think ROI is kind of tricky way. That's obviously companies are expecting some sort of ROI or they would not be asking for people to come back in. But getting to what that looks like or the basis on which they're even making that assumption seems certainly flawed given how much data there is out there, including in our report on the impact of remote on positive things like diversity and inclusion, like bringing in working parents and caregivers, involving people with disabilities that might not be able to get into an office. They can have meaningful work to do. So I think there are those big trade-offs that measuring a real return on investment would be a big challenge. But you're not wrong, Stephen. I think they're thinking that way. So we have a lot of other questions. I definitely want to make sure we cover these questions. So here we go. Maria asks, in theory, I understand, but how do you engage people to want to subscribe to trust and change? And how long does it take to see signs of healthy improvement? So let's say you get people on board and you're doing those trust building behaviors and modeling them and encouraging them. How long does it take to see signs of improvement?
Yeah, and I'm going to start with the first part of this. So how do you engage people to want to subscribe to trust and change? Because I think that's really critical here. So, and this is something we talk about in the report as well. As a leader, as a manager, you need to be leading by example. So you need to be doing the things that you're asking your team to do and practicing what you preach. And then if you are doing that, and if you are sort of in the ranks with your teams, with your folks, I think that trust naturally, organically will build itself because there's that authentic rapport that's being developed and that's being nurtured. I say all that in that I'm also mindful of You can control what you can control. So if you work for an organization where perhaps at the very top, this behavior either isn't being modeled or it isn't being clearly communicated, that's an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity at the very tip-top org level to say what we stand for and to prioritize trust. So you can be the best middle manager in the world, but if the company party line is not the same, that will be just an area that we can improve on.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think at the same time, you can start to model trust or embrace tools and tactics for building trust, even in your small team, even in whatever world you can control.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of small things that have big impacts by starting out by first saying, do we have a consistent way to talk about our goals? Do we have a consistent way, maybe within our team or within one-on-ones with managers, to say, how are we measuring success? What are our communication goals? Can we establish them for our team? One of the things that I do with a lot of my clients as kind of like the foundation for every kind of engagement is first figuring out, what are our communication goals? How do we describe them? If we say modern, what does that mean here? Or is that something that has a different meaning to every person?
Right.
If so, talk about that. Let's establish a message architecture. And that's a small thing that has a big impact in an organization, but at least it can start by having a big impact just within a team. From there, once you say, here's our sort of rubric or yardstick against which we're measuring consistency, then you can figure out, all right, well, when we're communicating, and I think this is visual as well as verbal, how do we know like how much detail we need in order to establish rapport with an audience, whether that's an internal group, maybe another team that we're trying to educate on our practices, or maybe it's an external constituency, maybe it's our board, maybe it's potential clients or customers. How much detail do we put into our reports, our diagrams, maybe our explanations when we do have to issue a public apology? Because once we say, here's what we do, anything that deviates from that is going to feel weird. It's going to attract notice.
Right.
And that undermines trust. So let's figure out how we do things and establish models for that. And then that can be documented in style guidelines, maybe in your design system. I will go on the record and say, yes, having a design system, having a content design system, that is one of the tools that you can use to establish trust. Editorial style guidelines, when you work within them, you will be more trusted. And not to be like, whenever you have a hammer, everything's a nail, but you can do a lot of things. Style guide. And then I think beyond that, modeling those behaviors of vulnerability and rewarding vulnerability by spotlighting it, saying, hey, this is somebody that stood up and gave feedback. They put their neck out and did this. Let's applaud it. Let's give them like an extra day off, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think you can do small things to start to build that culture of trust.
Yeah.
And you can see the impact from that right away.
And Margot, you've given a lot of great ideas. I know you have an entire book of ideas and examples, which is awesome. And we have an entire report with reinforcement of why trust is so important if you really want to have a high-performing team. But you ready, Margot? Here's a question from Leslie. You can thank her later. What is the most important thing a leader can do to regain trust of their team if it has been lost?
I'm going to give this one a shot. All right.
So
without knowing specifics, right? Because I don't know why trust may or may not have been lost or was lost, excuse me, I should say. I think it's pretty simple. I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier of be honest. So name that thing, name it and tame it. Say, hey, X happened. And you might be feeling this way. You might not be feeling this way. Have a candid conversation and then simply set the stage for how things are going to look going forward. And then make good on those promises and be simple in the way that you're communicating this. I think a lot of times one of the missteps leaders can make is just giving a lot of data or trying to justify why that mistake was made, right? Don't do that. Because all of the people on your team care about is there was a mistake that was made and my trust was broken or my sense of where this organization was going. There's been some contract that's been violated. How do we get back on track? Do we care about getting back on track? I went to this this HBR event recently, and they said something to a woman who was kind of struggling with this in her organization. And they said, basically, if you believe it, it will land. So if you truly believe as a leader, whatever message you're trying to give your team, and it's very authentic, it will land with other people. So just go into it with that mindset is what I would say.
That sounds like authenticity. What?
Yeah.
That's pretty
And
great.
be honest, right? This is part of that trust is being honest, even when it's bad, even when it's not it's a hard truth, right?
Yeah, agreed. Margot?
I think the single most thing a leader can do to regain trust when they've lost it, or even if they feel like they personally have not lost it, but trust has decayed within the team, is to apologize, to take responsibility for it in the first person. So say, I am sorry. Things here seem broken, or I screwed up. I am sorry that this is the case. I am sorry that I contributed to the team losing trust, or I am sorry that I lost your trust. ST said, it's important to kind of name and claim the thing. James Baldwin said, once you name a thing, you can control it. And I think being able to say, we have a problem, so I have this problem. Maybe I didn't recognize the issue soon enough. Maybe I saw there was this infighting going on, but I didn't respond. I am responding now. Here's what I am going to do differently moving forward so we fix it. So we fix it together. So apologize in the first person singular. Paint the picture of the future in the first person plural. I am sorry. Here's what we are going to do. And maybe there's a component of that. Here's also what I am going to do differently so it doesn't happen again. So we have this case in the future. So I am sorry that I saw disconnection happening, that people felt like their work wasn't being recognized, that I was not recognizing their work. Moving forward, we're going to do more road shows when a project goes live. We're going to share more of our work within the organization. Somebody called out offering more public mind mapping, saying, here's where we will be going. We're going to be tracking against those goals and everyone's individual reviews. I will be doing that. And moving forward, you will be recognized on a quarterly basis for your contributions to the team, to our department, and the company.
I love it.
I think that kind of effective, good apology.
I thought you were both going to try to not answer the one single most important thing. So nice job. Way to do it there. So Tyler has a question for us, which Tyler, if you promise you'll read the report, I will answer your question, which is what behaviors lead to high performing teams? So Tyler, I'm just going to pretend you responded and said, of course I'm going to read the report. I can hardly wait. So I'm just going to give you very high level without going into each one. Each is outlined along with supporting data in the report itself. So I do recommend you take the time to read the report and download it. But here are the 8 behaviors that we identified for high performing teams. 1 is the ability to adapt and innovate. Change is going to happen. Can you adapt and innovate? Number 2, they're motivated by brand purpose. They feel like they're part of something. Very important. Number 3, hello, ding, 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 ding. Foster trust. Foster trust. So they foster trust among the team. Number 4, they promote psychological safety. I know that goes along with trust, but certainly this concept of having a safe space, very important. Number 5, they exchange information. So effective communication. I know both Margot and ST are talking a lot about that here today. Great communication skills breed high performance. Number 6, they seek diverse opinions. So they bring together diverse point of views intentionally. So that is number 6. Number 7, they manage stress. They ease the short-term pain and focus on long-term gain. So number 7, we are still people at the end of the day. There you go. And number 8 is they embrace feedback, which is a place that we started. Margot was telling us about that. But being able to embrace and encourage feedback, even though back to where we started, only 77% of high-performing teams said that they are really good at this, and providing constructive feedback to one another. Those are the 8 behaviors. Again, I highly recommend you read it. And look, I got Tyler to write promise in the chat. Woohoo! Patricia, we do, there's a report, a link that was just put in there by Talent for the report itself. So for anyone who'd like to download it. Lots of great comments in here as well. Thank you so much, Bill. Lack of connection erodes trust. Yes, remote work can sometimes cause the quality of connections to be low res. Seek other ways to strengthen connections beyond the daily tasks. Great advice in here. Great questions in here. This is fantastic. Ooh, look at that. Nadia put the 8 behaviors in here. Boom. It's like we're all doing this together. This is collaboration. And is there trust in here, Margot? There must be. People are, bringing questions.
We're all just walking each other home, right? And I think like that idea, though, of building connections, as someone said, they're building connections maybe it's even outside of work. I'm not saying you have to go and do like a team building activity if you're like, no, I'm good. But I think building stronger connections in whatever community in which you operate, again, whether that's within a family, within a maybe a local community organization, or your favorite nonprofit that is absorbing a lot of your time and talent, or in your workplace or within your industry. I was just reading, Sarah Wachter-Boettcher wrote a marvelous piece that's on Medium now about gaslighting and how we need to navigate within that kind of environment in many work settings. And she called out, she wrote in it, reframing how we misunderstand value and the value in which the value that we contribute, by framing it instead as, if you feel misunderstood, look instead to see how you can build deeper connections, because you're working with people that may also feel misunderstood, that are imperfect and want to feel valued. And I think that idea of being able to recognize someone else's contribution,
Yes.
being able to recognize like the value that they want to add, and make room for that kind of in your own process, I think is a powerful kind of opportunity, because it brings them to the table rather than just coming in with something that is totally done and ready to rock, so that they can kind of just take it as a drink from the fire hose. By leaving the opportunities to say, let's prototype in public, let's work on this together, I think it allows people to have more of a sense of ownership.
Yeah.
And that goes out in really well through anything that requires ongoing governance, where you want people to buy into an idea rather than kind of pushing toward adoption. That's too late. Instead, let's get to a place of more co-ownership, which requires vulnerability and communication and all those other things that build trust.
Yes, definitely trust. So Christina asked for the post about gaslighting. I just put Sarah's LinkedIn in to be shared here in the chat. I don't have that link for gaslighting, but we can follow up with that afterwards. And if you haven't heard of Sarah Wachter-Boettcher, you should. She talks a lot also about trust and keeping it real, and she's got a lot of great content out there. So speaking of trust, all right, we just have a couple more minutes here, so I think we'll wrap up and then talk about that special surprise book giveaway. All right. So in terms of the role of trust in high performing teams, what are your final thoughts, ST? Final thoughts on the role of trust in high performing teams? Is this going to be like a Nike just do it? Or can I do that one? Just do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can do yours.
Absolutely. I think I like the Nike team kind of tie in there. I think my final thoughts on this are keep it simple and go with your gut, go with your instinct on what works. So if it allows folks on your team, if folks on your team need flexibility to be able to come to the table or to be able to engage, feel okay with giving flexibility, or for rallying or advocating for those folks to have flexibility. Mm-hmm. There was something else in the report we didn't touch on, but I think that's really key too, is as a leader, you have a lot of ability to impact a lot of these aspects of trust and high performance on your team. So the way that you show up, how you handle if someone in your team calls out sick, if you jump in, if you are a team player, that really will impact the team and psychological safety. Anyone who's ever worked for a bad boss can tell you that your managers have a lot to do with your mental health. So make sure you're clean, make sure you're working on yourself as well. In that way, you can put your team ahead of yourself, and you can be worried about that or be thinking about that. But yeah, I think that we've gone back to some of these issues with RTO, and I worry that we're neglecting the root cause of what we're trying to fix. I think what we're trying to fix is the communication and the rapport within the team. I don't think real estate is the be all and end all for that fix.
Sure. I love that. Thank you, ST. All right, Margot, final thoughts.
Start small, start where you are, and you don't need to be kind of just focusing on demonstrating your value or leaning in further to that. But I think if you are a leader, find out how your people want to be rewarded. Reward them for good, open communication and vulnerability and feedback. Encourage that culture of feedback. If you're asking them to be consistent with something, first figure out what that something is. Clearly define it, model it, so that they can embrace it too.
I love it. Yes. Yes. And that's something everybody can do. I think that, so hopefully takeaways today, we've got a lot of takeaways today about trust. You should definitely download the report and see how trust ties into high performing teams. So you can get into that. You should also check out Margot's book. And I know you're supposed to keep desk jackets, but I can't. It's so fun. Look at, they're acrobats. Okay. So sorry, Margot, I had to.
No, if you have it, look beneath the dust jacket.
It makes me happy. And that leads me into boop, boop, boop. We have, we're going to be giving away 2 books. You can have your very own Margot Trustworthy book. So for anyone who downloads our report by end of day tomorrow, so midnight on November the 15th, you will be entered into a drawing. There is no purchase necessary for you to be involved in this whatsoever. You just download the report, and we will be selecting a winner from the folks that download that. For better or worse, this is a US only offer to be able to ship out those books to you. So sorry, but we do have a lot of US participants here. So thank you for that. And then we'll notify you by email if you are the winner. So, and I hope you are. Just download the report. You know what? No matter what, you download the report, you're going to be a winner. That's, how it works, where you win because you get all the content, but you may also get a cool book. So ta-da! Thank you so much, ST and Margot, for being here today to talk about trust. This is such a big issue that is continuing and affecting so many parts of our work life today. So thank you for all your insights and your thoughts, and certainly for all your time today. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us today. And I think that's it. We're out. That's my jazz hands.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.